Hi, my name is Frankie. Thank you for listening to my mom. I never listen.
Well, from back in the day at Wake Forest when Amy Perko was a great player, and I had to guard her some in our matchups. We're the same age. I played at NC State. Amy and I went back and forth, and it's so great to see people that we played and competed against. I don't want to say how many decades ago, but we both know it was quite a while.
It was quite a while, and it is always good to reconnect. And as we all know, basketball, it's really one small family, has lots of connections.
So Amy, you have quite a bit of influence over the direction of college athletics. You're not going to take credit for it on this podcast. I know how humble you are, but I also know that leading the Knight Commission is a very daunting challenge. Tell us what the Knight Commission is, give us a little background on it, and then we'll launch into how it will help shape the future for women's basketball.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking. The Knight Commission is an independent group. We're funded by the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation. And our basic purpose is to lead transformational change to prioritize the athlete's education, health, safety, and success. The commission over time has a legacy of impact on NCAA policy and really the way college sports works at the highest level in terms of some of those policies. I'll give you an example. One is that teams have to be on track to graduate more than half their players to be eligible for postseason competition. And that was a change the NCAA adopted in 2011. It was a change that the commission pushed for more than a decade. So it really has prioritized and frankly has been a significant factor in leading to what we have now in Division I, which is the highest graduation rates ever across the board in all sports. And then another example is changing kind of the financial structure. So we pushed for academic incentives from the NCAA revenue distribution to be rewarded to schools that achieve a certain level of graduation rates. And 2 years ago, that went into effect for the first time. So now the NCAA revenue distribution, while it includes rewards to schools for other components for the first time ever, it will also include rewards for schools that meet that academic outcome component. And the March Madness contract extends to 2032. And with the finances in play, that will mean that more than $1 billion will be rewarded to schools for achieving those academic outcomes. So that gives you an idea, kind of the arc of our work. The commission as well, the thought leaders on our commission, university presidents, former athletes, all who share the goal of college sports and what it does to provide education and leadership opportunities for hundreds of thousands of athletes.
In today's athletic climate, you don't hear any of that discussion about academics. You really hear about the transfer portal and name, image, and likeness. And you threw out a couple of buzzwords, so I want you to extrapolate a little bit more about, we know the NCAA has a $1 billion contract through CBS and Turner for the men's tournament. And you said there's an academic distribution of that over the lifetime of the CBS and Turner contract, that'd be $1 billion distributed to universities for academics. Go into some of the finances of that, because I think our listeners would be really interested in what that means and how you're trying to save the sanctity of the academic experience for the student athlete.
Yeah, no, great question. And let me back up as well. I mean, let's start at the very beginning that, college sports, and in a nutshell, what the commission has been trying to do over time is frankly to emphasize the college in college sports. That's what universities do. Universities educate. And we all know that our model is unique. It's different than what exists in Europe with club team. And so, we need to be true to what universities are there to do and provide that educational experience for athletes. In terms of the financial structure, one of the big misunderstandings in college sports is really what the NCAA is and how the NCAA is funded. The NCAA is really the glue that holds the NCAA together is the basketball tournament. The NCAA does not receive any money from FBS football. The college football playoff is managed independently. So the NCAA receives pretty much all of its money from the March Madness tournament. And that, as you referenced, is a tournament that generates over $1 billion a year. So that means, in essence, the Division II and Division III, the championships that they provide, the NCAA provides to, those athletes, it's all funded by March Madness. In terms of then how the NCAA, what the NCAA does with that money, it sends the majority of that money back to Division I schools. Of course, it uses $400 million a year to fund championships, to fund its services, and more than 90 championships across the board, men's and women's sports. But $600 million of it goes back to Division I schools. And as with anything in life, Debbie, sometimes behaviors are influenced by incentives and the incentive structure. And when the NCAA distribution, it currently rewards about 30%, 28% of that $600 million is rewarded based on the performance of men's basketball teams only. And so that's another change that we've highlighted that needs to be made, because the NCAA in its constitution says it's committed to gender equitable treatment and conducting all of its activities in a gender equitable way. And that's just a very clear example of if you're going to have financial rewards within a system that we know influences behaviors, influences priorities, then the incentives need to change so that if the NCAA rewards athletic success, then it rewards success of women's teams as well. So that's one major, change that we've pointed out needs to be made. It was also a change that was in the Kaplan Heckler report. And folks, listeners may know that was an independent law firm commissioned by the NCAA to examine gender equity in the championships across the board. So going back to the incentives, that's the incentive structure. Prior to our recommendation that it also include academic incentives, that component wasn't there. So now academic incentives are being included, they're being phased in, and it makes a big difference, particularly for, some of the mid-majors and conferences that get usually their one automatic qualifier in the men's tournament. In the past, they were doing a lot of things to try to figure out how do we get one more men's team in the tournament to get more funding for our conference and then for our schools. And now they've shifted their strategy of let's make sure all our schools have the academic support that the athletes need, so we can make sure we hit those graduation components. And so we think that's a much better outcome for those schools. And again, it's an example of incentives do change behavior.
So with the NCAA constitution that's being rewritten, and based on what you just said, that yes, you're right, there were a lot of mid-major conferences that are always trying to figure out through their scheduling, through a RPI or the net, how they can get one more team into the NCAA tournament so they can get more of a revenue distribution. But now I'm hearing you say that some of those conferences, not the Power Five, because we know the Power Five is trying to get as many as they can in. That's where the money is. But the mid-majors, they need that money also. So some of them now are reconfiguring their strategy long-term to actually care about the student athlete experience, the academic component, the graduation of a student athlete, so they can get some more money. Is that an equal distribution based on if you get an extra team in the tournament versus what you might get academically if you graduate your players?
Yeah, no, great question. And I would say, in terms of the lingo that has come around, it used to be talked about in terms of we need to figure out how to get another basketball unit. Those units equal so much value. And now it has changed. How do we get the academic unit? And so the money right now is not equal in the incentive pool. I referenced, the men's basketball tournament success is 28% of the 600 million. So, you're looking at over 150 million a year distributed, but it's being phased in. So by around 2030, it's going to be the end of the lifetime of the current contract. Those distribution pools will be the same amount. But it is increasing over time. And I've had conference commissioners, say to me, it has made a significant difference in our conference. And that's really what we're focused on, to make sure that we're getting that academic unit. And the academic unit is a measure for all athletic teams, not just the basketball teams. But I would say, I think there will be significant changes with revenue distribution model moving forward because of this constitutional review. I think the NCAA also realizes it has to change the structure of just rewarding for the success in the men's basketball tournament, given the gender equity issues there. So I think that's one of several significant areas we will see some change in over the next 2 to 3 years.
So before we jump into the equity part of our conversation that I'm looking forward to having with you, I want to make sure I clarify this with you. Over the lifetime of the remaining contract with CBS and Turner with the NCAA, there is an incentive for the academic component, which conferences are figuring out. And I'm sure they're adding resources, meaning more academic counselors, more space for academics, more tutors, those kinds of things. Do we have enough data right now to know if the name, image, likeness, and/or transfer portal has shown that players are graduating? Like, if there are players now that in basketball that could be at 3 or 4 different schools, where does their academic progress, because there used to be a formula, like when you left a school, you still counted towards their academic progress. Now you go to another school, now you count on their academic progress. How does that work?
Yeah, it's a good question with regard to the transfer portal in particular, because the data have shown that one of the single biggest factors towards successful graduation is actually retention. But the eligibility rules have not changed with regard to progress toward degree. So there still is that component. If someone transfers, they still have to make that progress toward degree requirement, which has been one of the more significant factors of improving graduation rates from where they were back in the 80s, when there was not that progress toward degree requirement. So I think, given the transfer portal and the increase in transfers, that's certainly data points that will need to be reviewed. But even with basketball over the past 5 years, there's been, I think, in men's basketball, 40% transfer rate, and because of the the progress toward degree requirements, you did not see, we've seen an increase in graduation rates in men's basketball. So the NIL is interesting, because what we've heard is that it may actually encourage more athletes to stay another year when they may not have. So we think that will potentially help more than hurt graduation rates.
Well, when you put it in that context, yeah, I mean, now the players get a chance to make money. And if retention has proven to help graduation, then if you're making X number of dollars playing for a certain place, why would you want to put yourself in the transfer portal? I know a lot of people or coaches that tell me that some of their kids that went into the transfer portal don't even have a scholarship this year because they rolled the dice on giving up their scholarship. And I think sometimes we forget about the value of that component. You and me as parents paying tuition for our kids to go to college know as scholarship athletes and D1 players that you referenced the 80s. It just made me think about, yeah, we rode the bus and yeah, we didn't have an academic progress rate, but we knew what our responsibility was because we were accountable for graduating. And we didn't have a 20-hour rule. We practiced, we watched film, we lifted weights. There was no egregious, I know at NC State, there was nothing egregious about the time that we spent. And we certainly had time for social. And trust me, I had plenty of social when I was in college. So it's just interesting how things have changed over the decades because you're in such an important leadership position. And you and I had a similar experience playing in the ACC, playing at a high level. Where do you see, and to put your vision hat on about where do you think the next contract for the NCAA basketball could be, and or if you would like to go in this direction instead of what do you think is going to happen to the NCAA first that might affect the contract? Because there's a lot of discussion about, creating different divisions inside Division I, and that probably is the right thing to do for the future of college sports.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think that is the overarching question. We are in a real evolutionary moment for the NCAA. I describe it in terms of when you look at the arc of history of the NCAA. Obviously, the first big moment was 1906 when it was founded, and founded primarily to save the sport of football because of the deaths that were occurring in that sport at the time, to develop safety rules to make that sport safer. And then the next evolutionary moment for the NCAA really in 1981, when it first sponsored NCAA championships for women, as a result of passage of Title IX earlier in 72 and how that then impacted women's sports. And then one other that, that the last time the NCAA really restructured was 1974 when it split into divisions 1, 2, and 3. So I think we're looking at another evolutionary moment like that. When the NCAA restructured in 74, divisions 1, 2, and 3, it was only 4 years later that then Division I, at least in football, subdivided. So folks are used to there being that 1A and 1AA in football. And we might see that in Division I moving forward. Division I now has more than 300, it used to be 351. I think we're at 357 Division I schools. So you might see a subdivision in certain sports. So everything is really on the table. And what changed, what triggered all of this is the Alston decision by the Supreme Court just this past June that really put a big question mark in terms of what the NCAA's authority can be legally as it relates to a number of rules. And so you're going to see more autonomy given to conferences and more autonomy given at the division level to really define what Division I should be, how its championship access should work moving forward, and looking at some of key changes in revenue distribution. So it's hard to say what things are going to look like. From our own standpoint, we think there should be a national organization because the common thread is ultimately providing opportunities for young men and young women to develop their potential educationally, developmentally, through these opportunities in sport. And so that's the common thread. And that's the common thread that frankly is being lost because the commercial side looks so different from Division I to Division III. But so from our standpoint, there needs to be more emphasis in the revenue distribution and the incentives so that we have that common thread of what college sports really is at its core for the young men and women having that opportunity.
Okay, so let's drill down into the Kaplan report and gender equity and where from your seat, which let me remind our listeners, you're not an employee of the NCAA. The Knight Commission is separate from the NCAA. So, let's just bypass the March Madness logo being able to be used and going to 68 teams. Because to me, that's the low-hanging fruit in this whole equation. We were eligible and able to use the March Madness logo on the women's side. We elected not to build our own brand. And whether you agree or disagree with that. And then the second is the 68 teams. I'm not sure we have 64 good teams that could play in the tournament. So I'm hoping that there might be a restructure at the bottom of the 68 so that those teams that are traditionally the 16 or the 15 seeds can actually have a postseason experience where they have a chance to win, because we know that 15s and 16s are most likely not going to win. So let's move aside from that. Let's talk about the economic part of our game. I've been a big proponent of lots of changes in our format and lots of efforts to have an economic, visionary proposal around our game so that we can actually sit at the table and have earned, not be treated as an expense, but as an investment in earning part of that revenue distribution that you're talking about. I mean, your formula is going to give it to the women because that's the right thing to do from a gender equity standpoint. But I want to know from an economic standpoint, if we could make some changes, what might they be, and what did the Kaplan report provide that would give us an opportunity to believe we have hope?
Yeah, and I'll take, for that question, I'll really take my Knight Commission hat off, and to be clear on that, the Knight Commission, we are independent voice, and we really have looked more at the policy and principle issues, the operational issues, which is more of a sport operation question here, is not what we delve into. But I would say at the higher level, the principle and level in terms of NCAA structure, that's where it gets to, again, seeing all the sports with the value they bring to the individual, to the individual participants. And in terms of the work we do, I'll come back specifically to women's basketball, but we just released a report really promoting a new financial framework for Division I, and it impacts revenue distribution. It would impact how institutions show how the money is spent to invest more in athletes' education, health, and safety. And we had 21 coaches associations endorse that report. And those 21 coaches associations are really the coaches associations for the Olympic sports. We hope to present our model soon to the basketball coaches associations. But their comment is, and the reason they support what we've put out there, is it also puts incentives into all of the sports and shows, that this is, these opportunities are just as important for women's volleyball as men's basketball, or men's tennis as women's basketball. So, I did want to note that as it relates specifically to the opportunities for women's basketball, I think it's been highlighted to look at the sports differently. What may work for men's basketball, even policy-wise, may not be the same for women's basketball. And in March Madness and the bracket, originally the 64-team bracket was, such a booming success. You see that model was followed in a lot of other sports, but you've seen some real successes with sports that have done things a little bit differently. The Women's College World Series is a great example where Oklahoma, City just made that its home. Omaha made it its home for men's baseball. And I was worked at the University of Kansas as the associate AD and had a great working relationship with then Marita Hines, who was at Oklahoma. And Marita Hines deserves the credit for what the Women's College World Series became in Oklahoma City. So you have to have that champion. But the big picture lesson from that, is that, let's look at each sport strategically and look at those opportunities for those sports. And women's basketball certainly is there and deserves that from a NCAA, from a strategic staffing and a strategic level of saying, where are those opportunities and should we look at doing this differently?
Amy, come on now. The rules are different. The game is different. You watch a men's game on television, they have halves, we have quarters. That's the window dressing of the biggest change. But then when you drill down inside, I mean, the men have the flopping rule, the cylinder rule, and we don't have any of those. The men are more willing to allow a step back, a spin move, or a Euro step without calling traveling, and the women are going to call it when that happens. So let's just establish that the games are different, right? So the models, to your point, the future of the women's game is predicated on our existing leadership being able to make some really strong changes in how we go about conducting our business. Our game is good. We've done it for 30 plus ways the same way. It's time, and it's been past time for some revolutionary change. I've been advocating for a change in our game for over a decade in the way we present our game from an NCAA standpoint. And you mentioned Marita Hines, and I know Marita, and you're absolutely right about how she drove home the fact that Oklahoma City isn't a destination city, but it could become that for volleyball, for softball.
Yeah.
And I don't understand why it's so difficult on our side to see it that way. If you're a student athlete or a coach right now, and you're listening to this incredibly educational podcast about the structure of the NCAA, where the Knight Commission fits in, and what you've been able to do to lead some dramatic future opportunity for our game. What do you think your responsibility as a student athlete or a coach should be right now to help advance our game?
Well, I would say one big takeaway is the saying that a small group of people can make big changes. That's the only way big changes have come about over time. So don't see yourself as, I'm only one coach or one student athlete. A small group of people really with a goal and shared values and goals in mind can create change. So, and as I said, right now we're at an evolutionary moment. And so, being able to present ideas and fight for ideas with athletic directors, commissioners, letting your voice be heard, is really critically important. I would say for athletes, we just sent a letter to, the chair of the NCAA Constitution Committee, advocating for there to be at least one male and one female voting athlete on the highest governing board of the NCAA in each division. As they have their draft currently now, it would be one athlete. And again, with the gender equity issues, we feel like there has to be a constitutional requirement to make sure there's at least one female and one male. So that may seem like, there's a lot of big issues happening, and that may seem to be a very small one, but having the right votes and seats at the table is critically important. And that decision is going to be made in the next month in terms of who gets a seat and who gets a vote. So that's an example where, we'd really love for athletes to get on board and endorse that and say, we agree with that.
Outside of the 68 teams and the addition of the use of the March Madness logo in the next NCAA women's tournament, what else would you like to see? If you could be president for the day, I play this game with myself. If I was president for the day, or if I were in those shoes, what would I do? Or how would I feel? Or what would I think about trying to advance our game?
Well, I think and I know this has been done in the past in terms of, have so much respect for Val Ackerman and the white paper she put together. And it took a number of years for some of those changes to come about. But I think, we're at a moment again where, I would bring in, the thought leaders on this issue who have, different ideas. You got to bring in, the folks who really see the future as well in terms of the media and athletes and coaches. And so there's so many individuals who have great ideas and have invested so much in the way the game has grown, that we need to create kind of out of the box opportunity, not just, this committee, but really those individuals who are helping to drive change, or who are involved in the game outside of the normal NCAA committee structure, that could really provide some, like I said, out of the box thinking and really advance things forward. I think about a leader you and I are both familiar with, Norlin Finch, and back when we played, she drove the change to a smaller basketball. We had to adjust, and so over time there have been those changes that you forget about that really were very important to improving the game. And so we really need, leaders like yourself and others to continue to push those ideas and to take it to the next level.
Amy, since we're talking some academics on this podcast, I feel compelled to tell you, since you brought up Coach Finch's name, and Norlin Finch recruited me. I played at NC State, obviously. She was an assistant for 1 year before she went into administration. And I have to tell you, my greatest academic accomplishment happened in graduate school at Ohio University when I was getting my master's in sports administration. Mm-hmm. I wrote my thesis on the change in the ball size from the men's ball to the smaller, I don't want to call it the women's ball because it's used in youth basketball as well. And I wrote my thesis without going to the library before the internet. Now absorb that for a second. Yeah. No internet existed when I was in grad school, and I never went to the library to write my thesis. Coach Finch had a file that was probably about 3 inches thick that had all kinds of research and information and data on it. She let me borrow it, and I wrote my thesis based on that file, and I consider that to be my greatest academic accomplishment. Writing my thesis, never going to the library before we had Google.
Well, you had direct source though. You had the book before it was ever published and written. So that's great.
You got to use your resources, right? You got to just know where to go. Okay, so because I feel like you're charged with protecting the integrity of college athletics as an outside independent advisor council organization that is like, I don't want to call it a watchdog. I would call it maybe, someone that's just keeping things aligned. I want to ask you your perspective about it, because you and I both have athletes playing in college that are playing basketball. Your daughter's at Meredith, my son, your daughter, Kate, my son, Patrick, my youngest, is a point guard at Emory and Henry. It's Division II school. Mm-hmm. We've experienced the D1, but to watch the love, the passion, the pure desire to compete and be with a team and have an experience in college playing is really remarkable. I mean, I think sometimes we forget about that. As pure as that sounds, I know that's what my son is having. I'm assuming that your daughter is having a similar experience. How proud does that make you feel about where you actually have sport in your vision for your future and your life, and where it fits? Like, we played when there weren't any yucks to get. You got a basketball scholarship, and that was awesome, right? Because we graduate with no debt. That's amazing. Mm-hmm. For someone who right now is paying 3 tuitions, that's amazing to have no debt when you graduate from college. But where do you feel about the purity of what you're doing on a daily basis to try to make a difference for somebody's kid to have a great experience?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's part of, I think why we both share the passion we do for college sports, because of, what it means to our own development, what we achieved, what we got out of our college sports experience, how it helped shape us and prepare us. And again, it goes back to, this common thread that we see, regardless of which level, regardless of if you're at a program that has a budget, athletics budget of 200 million versus a program that struggles to get a budget of 100,000 to provide these opportunities at another level. It's all about, universities that are there to educate and develop young men and women, providing these educational opportunities through sport. And so again, it's our hope that with whatever happens at the highest level of Division I, that there, continue to be this common thread, because it is, it's such an important, it's part of the fabric of our culture in terms of college sports and sports binding communities together as well. So, I've just at every level, what it means and the opportunities and how much it can provide. We certainly think it's worth preserving and continue to work hard to try to help provide solutions to some of the problems that are, frankly, threats, to the future of the model.
Amy, this has been absolutely incredible that you take time from your very busy schedule to join us on Nothing But Net. I just want to ask you what you do when you're not, because we got reintroduced again over time on the golf course. You and I both love to play golf. What else do you like to do? Like, give us something that you enjoy doing when you're not studying the model.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually have turned into a competitive tennis player, so play in USTA, but always with a team. There's all these different teams you can play on. So I've also met a number of former college basketball players who've turned into tennis players like myself. So enjoy that, and bike riding, and all kinds of fun activities. So definitely enjoy staying active in tennis, biking, golf. So I'll look forward to playing with you again sometime and definitely next year at the Ncaa Classic.
We'll certainly play some golf down here at Bulls Bay. I'll get you down here because it's not that far for you to drive down to play. Well, maybe we'll get Norlin Finch on the course with us. That'd be a good,
that sounds
be a good
great.
Group.
Yeah.
And then just the last thing is, without, pushing a tire up a hill in snow and talking about how tough we had it or how wonderful we had it, can you just give us a fond memory or something that you recall from your experience at Wake Forest as a player that you think about, or something, a story you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite basketball memories was the ACC tournament my junior year. One of our captain that year was Lisa Stockton, now the coach at Tulane, great player. Just fortunate to have the opportunity to play with Lisa. And we upset Duke in the ACC tournament first round. And it was, I was fortunate to hit a last second shot. And Katie Meier was guarding me at the time.
Right.
So anyway, I grew up actually a Wake Forest fan, and, like I'm sure you can associate with this, when I shot baskets on my driveway goal, I always, would dream of and practice, hitting that last second shot at the ACC tournament. So when something like that actually happens, it takes you to another place. And I can remember after the game, after our celebration, the Duke coach, Debbie Leonard, came over to me and congratulated me. And she said, that's a moment you'll never forget. It'll be with you for a lifetime. And she was right. And so that's certainly you know, one of my favorite memories that able to share kind of that celebratory moment with our teammates as well.
Well, Amy, it's been a real pleasure to spend some time with you. You have made our podcast smarter and better because you took the time to be with me and BMAC, our producer. I can't thank you enough. I'm looking forward to what's next at the NCAA and appreciate your work. Your scope of work is huge. Your vision for the future is really important for our game. And we're lucky to have leaders like you helping push us forward and hold us accountable. But mostly push us forward because that's what we really need. Sometimes we need just a big old kick in the butt. And I'm sure you're able to help provide some of that. So I hope you'll know this is a resource for you anytime there's something that you want to discuss or you want to come back, if there's something that changes. And this is a platform for women's basketball to discuss the future of our game. And I can't thank you enough for taking the time.
Well, thanks for having me. Enjoyed it, Debbie.